It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, less than a week from today, we will kick off the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. Last week, we did learn about NOAA's outlook for the season, which does run June the 1st through November the 30th. They are predicting a 30% chance of a near normal season and a 60% chance of a slightly above normal season. The agency is forecasting a range of 13 to 19 total named storms. That would be tropical features that gain a 39-mile-an-hour wind or higher. Of those, 6 to 10 are forecasted to become hurricanes. The designation for that is 74 miles an hour or higher, including 3 to 5 major hurricanes. That's a category 3, 4, or 5 with winds in excess of 111 miles per hour. NOAA says they have about a 70% confidence with those predictions. And while it is an above-average prediction from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, it is just slightly above the normal average for an Atlantic hurricane season. According to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he says, quote, NOAA and the National Weather Service are using the most advanced weather models and cutting-edge hurricane tracking systems to provide Americans with real-time storm forecasting and warnings. With these models and forecasting tools, we have never been more prepared for a hurricane season, with many folks within NOAA at the press conference last week with that announcement stressing the importance of being prepared for a hurricane season now instead of when a storm is bearing down on your area. Of course, all of this still continued on the minds of western North Carolina, where Hurricane Helene in September of last year left so much devastation and destruction out west. Obviously, the hurricane season has a peak here for the Atlantic basin. That happens in the months of from the months of July onward, once ocean heating and the heat of the summer really starts kicking up in the Atlantic basin. We'll have some additional details this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Again, the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season slightly above average, according to NOAA. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We have been keeping a very close eye on an ongoing legal debate in the state of North Carolina as it relates to who has power and authority over the North Carolina State Board of Elections. A new decision out from the state's highest courts on Friday, right ahead of the Memorial Day weekend. Mitch Kokai with the John Locke Foundation joins us with details this morning. Mitch, for folks that have been keeping tuned with the show over the last couple of months, we've discussed this power battle between the General Assembly and Democrat Governor Josh Stein over appointment authority with the State Board of Elections. What are we learning this morning?
Well, at this point, it looks as if appointments are going to stay with State Auditor Dave Boliek, at least for the foreseeable future. So the 3-2 Republican majority board that Boliek put in place remains in place, at least for now. Just to take a step back, we should remind folks that late last year, the General Assembly passed a new law that, among other things, shifted power over the State Board of Elections, including appointments that affect not only the state board, but also all of the 100 county boards of elections, from the governor's office to the state auditor, Republican Dave Boliek. At the time, then Governor Roy Cooper and incoming Governor Josh Stein filed suit over this. And Josh Stein was able to secure in late April an order, a split order from a 3-judge trial court panel in his favor. The trial court ruling that the changes that were part of Senate Bill 382 were unconstitutional and that elections appointments needed to remain with the governor's office. A week later, on April 30th, just one day before the law was supposed to change, the State Court of Appeals issued an order blocking what the trial court panel did. Now, the State Court of Appeals didn't offer any explanation, but it did offer an order that blocked what the trial court did, which means that Boliek was able to go forward with his new appointments. The state Supreme Court at the time, despite a request from Governor Josh Stein, said nothing. And the state Supreme Court had said nothing about this case until Friday. On Friday, the state Supreme Court issued an order that allowed the appeals court's order to remain in place, meaning that the trial judge's ruling was blocked and that the state law was allowed to go forward as planned. Thus, Dave Boliek and his appointments to the Elections Board are able to go forward. This was a decision that split the court along party lines. The 5 Republicans agreed not to do anything about the appeals court's order, while the 2 Democrats dissented, saying that the appeals court stepped in and stepped in and allowed an unconstitutional law to go forward, unlike what the trial judges had said should happen. So it is a partisan split. The other thing that we learned from this decision is a little bit more about how the state Supreme Court might ultimately rule in this case. Now, that was not what was before them. This wasn't supposed to be a final decision in this legal dispute. It was only about whether the State Court of Appeals had the authority and was right to step in and block what the trial judges said. Despite that, the order from the majority on the state Supreme Court, it was unsigned, said that the trial court got it wrong, basically saying that the trial court misapplied previous precedents for the ruling that it came up with. And then in a couple of concurring opinions, Justice Phil Berger Jr. suggested, although he didn't say this definitively, but suggested that this shift of elections board appointments from the governor to the state auditor was likely constitutional because it was a change of power within the executive branch rather than a shift of power from the executive branch to the legislative branch. And then in another concurring opinion, Justice Richard Dietz suggested that he didn't really yet have a decision about whether this was constitutional or not, but he did agree that the trial court got it wrong and said that it was, at this point, not a good idea to step in and change what the appeals court did, since the elections board had already shifted to the new appointments and there was already a new board in place. He said it would be unwise to try to unring that bell. And so what we have right now is the newly appointed Board of Elections will remain in place. Presumably, Dave Boliek will be able then to also go in and make his appointments for the county boards of elections, which will shift them also from 3-2 Democrat to 3-2 Republican. Meanwhile, this legal action will play out as the General Assembly and Dave Boliek appeal the trial court's ruling in the Court of Appeals. There will be a full round of briefing and probably oral arguments in the appeals court. The appeals court will come out with some sort of decision. And then once that happens, then whichever party loses could try to go back to the state Supreme Court and reverse that.
So as it stands this morning, it seems like everything pretty much staying put, at least as of right now. Mitch, now that with many of these legal challenges that we talk about, there can be months gap between when we get any new details. Do we have any idea about a timeline from the appeals court as to when they would move forward with something like this? Or are we essentially in kind of a holding pattern for right now until they go through this process, which will include documentation and everything following a normal trial?
Well, it's a bit of a holding pattern at this point. Now, in Justice Dietz's concurring opinion, he asked the appeals court to move forward. I think his word was expeditiously, but if it wasn't expeditiously, it was close to that, saying, try to resolve this pretty quickly, because of course we do have municipal elections coming up and then preparations for the 2026 elections. And so we would want to see this whole dispute of the elections board resolved sooner rather than later. But unless the appeals court decides to step up its calendar, and there may be a request from one side or the other, or even both sides to do that, you would probably see something like weeks pass before a court filing from the legislative leaders and Auditor Dave Boliek saying why they think the Court of Appeals, why they think the trial judge panel got it wrong. Then you would see a few more weeks pass before you'd see a response from Governor Stein about why he thinks the trial court got it right. And then there would be oral arguments scheduled, and then a gap of weeks or months before a decision. So it's the type of thing that, if it follows the normal court procedure, might not be resolved for many months or even a year or so. So it'll be very interesting to see whether the court decides to come up with some sort of expedited schedule or not. If not, it's something that won't be resolved for months or even a year or more.
Obviously, this has a pretty big impact on the state of North Carolina. We'll keep a very close eye on the details this morning. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It is time to head on over to the traffic center on what is expected to be a busy Tuesday morning on the roadways with Mike Doan.
Thank you, Nick. Things looking
It's 521. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, has once again denied Democrat Governor Josh Stein's request for an extension of 100% federal cost sharing for debris removal and emergency protective measures in western North Carolina, including direct federal assistance for an additional 180 days. The letter sent last Thursday by FEMA to Governor Stein states that the request was not warranted. This is exactly what they said in April when they first denied the appeal, or first denied the extension. The governor then appealed that decision. On Friday, Stein said in a press release, quote, "The first step to help western North Carolina recover is to clean up all of the debris. And so far, we have removed more than 12 million cubic yards of debris from roads and waterways. But given the immense scale of the wreckage, we have only scratched the surface. FEMA's denial of our appeal will cost North Carolina taxpayers potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up out west. The money we have to pay towards debris removal will mean less money towards supporting our small businesses, rebuilding downtown infrastructures, repairing our water and sewer systems, and other critical needs." Stein said despite the news, however, his office will stay the course, noting, quote, "We will keep pushing the federal and state governments to do right by western North Carolina. We will keep working with urgency, focus, and transparency to get any appropriated money on the ground as quickly as we can speed to recovery. We will not forget the people of western North Carolina." He said that he would continue to ask the Trump administration and Congress to send $19 billion to North Carolina for disaster relief, $11.5 billion in new appropriations, and $7.5 billion in allocations from previous appropriations that have yet to have their money doled out. Earlier last week, Stein announced his second Hurricane Helene budget proposal, which was $891 million. We covered those details last week. At the press conference, he noted that he did, in fact, write a letter to the president's FEMA Advisory Council urging them to improve FEMA, not eliminate it. Stein saying at the time, "The talk about eliminating FEMA makes no sense because storms happen all across the country. They don't happen in each state every year. So we cannot create a permanent infrastructure with the knowledge and expertise to respond to storms if we don't have one for 3 or 4 years. We don't want people just sitting there doing nothing. Whereas if we have a federal response that has expertise and technical assistance, as well as the resources of the federal government, then we can help whatever local government is needed, which state gets impacted by the storm down the road. So we want to improve FEMA, not eliminate it," end quote there from Governor Josh Stein. Hurricane Helene caused approximately $60 billion in damage in western North Carolina in September of last year. And as you heard just a few minutes ago, NOAA is expecting a slightly above average hurricane season. All eyes will be on the tropics of when that season kicks off June the 1st until November the 30th. In some other news as it relates to natural disasters and the impact on North Carolina, there are still many unanswered questions about why the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, that's NCORE, ended up over $300 million in the hole while being tasked with building new homes for victims of Hurricane Florence and Matthew in eastern North Carolina. The office was created in 2018 by former Governor Roy Cooper to assist in the rebuilding process following the hurricanes. But its ongoing failures with financial mismanagement have created a backlog of people that are still waiting to have their homes repaired or rebuilt. Nearly a decade later, over 750 homeowners are still awaiting a home to go home to. 4 state government operations hearings over the past few years, with the most recent one taking place in January, have unfortunately generated very few answers and often the cycle of wash, rinse, and repeat, with the same questions being asked and the same non-answers coming from NCORE officials. With that, State Auditor Dave Boliek says he's hoping to change that. A new audit that is expected out in the month, or actually likely coming out in the month of June, will examine past mistakes and how to avoid them going forward in terms of spending money in response to disasters. In a recent exclusive interview with CarolinaJournal.com, he said that the ultimate result shouldn't be pointing fingers and placing blame, but rather examining and giving a full accounting of how the money is and was being spent. The state auditor noting, what kind of return on investment did taxpayers get on that money? How do we operate moving forward so that we don't find ourselves back in a situation where a new executive director of a disaster relief agency is sitting in front of a joint oversight committee asking for $300 million to fill a hole that the General Assembly believed was already filled when they first appropriated the money? We need to prevent this from happening again because it's really hard for everyday North Carolinians, quite frankly, to wrap their arms around what $300 million really is. It is a tremendous amount of money. To put that number in context, State Auditor Dave Boliek noted that his entire office's current budget is only $26.5 million for the entire year. He noted, quote, I can tell you the goal is best practices and how do we need to do things moving forward. If we can't deliver that from the state auditor's office, I don't feel like we're doing our job. We have progress meetings with our NCOR audit team every week and sometimes twice a week. We're looking at things like what are we doing? What sort of data are we collecting? What numbers are we crunching? All of that to give a full picture result of what has been going on, with the state auditor noting it has been a step-by-step process that he noted in an exclusive interview with Carolina Journal has been, quote, very, very productive. So much so that his office says that they will be able to meet the July 1 deadline of when that audit is due, so likely seeing details on that in the next couple of weeks. He noted that they are very confident that they will be able to shine a light not only on how the money was spent, but give some direction and some solid common sense processes and procedures moving forward as to how to manage large sums of money like this. State Auditor Boliek noted, quote, our legislature, for example, worked really hard in creating a rainy day fund, and then it rained. So it's time to use that money, and it's been hard-saved money. Individual taxpayers and citizens, as well as people in the state of North Carolina, have invested that money. And then when that money is used and some of it is wasted, that is a significant problem. Boliek said that the same thing needs to be done in terms of how money is spent when it comes to disasters in the state, like asking for quotes or estimates from different providers or companies before, quote, throwing money at the problem. With that, State Auditor Dave Boliek's office is also keeping an eye on the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina. That's GROW-NC, which Democrat Governor Josh Stein created after his first executive order, after his first full day in office. That entity, GROW-NC, has been tasked with helping Hurricane Helene recovery and rebuilding efforts in the western half of the state. Thus far, we are still waiting to see some results from GROW-NC as to how exactly that money is being spent. And as you can imagine, hearing some of the quotes from State Auditor Dave Boliek as it relates to NCOR, which was, again, responsible for Hurricanes Florence and Matthew, he and his office and his team will have a very close eye on GROW-NC. We do have some additional details this morning on this story over on our website, CarolinaJournal.com, where it's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at traffic this morning with Mike Doan.
Thank you, Nick.
It's 5:37. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Don't forget that if you missed any portion of our show this morning, you can check out the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast in your favorite podcast app. Just search for the show, hit the subscribe or follow button, and you'll get a new program delivered each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. We are less than a week away from the start of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. We learned some details last week out of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, about what they are predicting for this upcoming storm season. The agency is forecasting a range of 13 to 19 total named storms. A storm out of the Atlantic basin does become named when it has winds of 39 miles an hour or higher. Of those, 6 to 10 are forecast to become hurricanes with winds of 74 miles an hour or higher, with 3 to 5 of those storms being major hurricanes, being either a Category 3, 4, or 5, with winds of in excess of 111 miles per hour. According to acting NOAA Administrator Laura Grimm, she said, quote, "As we witnessed last year with significant inland flooding from Hurricanes Helene and Debbie, the impacts of hurricanes can reach far beyond coastal communities. NOAA is critical for delivering of early and accurate forecasts and warnings and provides the scientific expertise that is needed to save lives and properties." NOAA looked into some details and noted that warmer than average ocean temperatures, including some other conditions, including higher activity out of the Western African monsoon season, is a primary starting point for the above average season that they are predicting. National Weather Service Director Ken Graham noted, quote, "In my 30 years at the National Weather Service, we've never had more advanced models and warning systems in place to monitor the weather. This outlook is a call to action. Be prepared, take proactive steps now to make a plan, and gather supplies to ensure that you're ready before a storm threatens your area." NOAA has many things that they keep an eye on throughout the year. The Atlantic hurricane season is one of them. Again, that kicks off at June the 1st and runs all the way until November 30th. We'll have some additional details this morning on that on our website, carolinajournal.com. Continuing our discussion on tariffs this morning with Katie Zender from carolinajournal.com. Katie, you have walked us through the agriculture industry. We've talked about some of the technology sectors in North Carolina. This morning, we're focusing on steel, which, interestingly enough, was actually a big tariff discussion in the first Trump administration. What are you learning from some steel providers and producers here in North Carolina about some of the tariff impacts that it's having on their industry this time around?
That's exactly right, Nick. Good morning. Earlier this week, we had the roundtable kind of discussion with former Vice President Mike Pence and a few industry leaders, and I got to pull one of them aside for kind of a separate interview after the event, and that was the CEO of Insteel Industries, which is based in Mount Airy, North Carolina. So Howard Waltz III is the president and CEO of Insteel Industries. They're based out of Mount Airy, but they have 10 plants located across the United States. The company manufactures infrastructure and construction products, kind of, a lot of products that most people aren't really going to know what they are or going to understand, but he says that they're essential reinforcement for anything constructed out of concrete. So anything involved in construction, bridges, anything like that, they are making those products that are involved in the reinforcement of that. And so he said the reason that managed trade doesn't work is that there's no one smart enough to manage it. And one thing that we really talked about during the roundtable discussion that all of the leaders kind of agreed on is that when it comes to tariffs and the impact on trade, China is different. And so Howard Waltz says China is almost solely responsible for the sad state of affairs that exists in the steel industry worldwide. And that's because they export more steel than the U.S., than the entire size of the U.S. market, and they export it at even lower prices because these companies don't have to make a profit. And so there's no price that's too low for these companies. So China really has a huge advantage here in the steel industry, Nick.
Katie, hearing that, does that not bolster the argument that's being made by President Trump and folks that are close to him pushing forward these discussions about industries in China like the steel industry that is able to saturate the world market and offer prices that no U.S. consumer, or maybe more accurate to say no other global producer could even possibly compete with, because, as you just noted, it doesn't really matter if they're making money or not?
Right. So you would think that, Nick, but when we're talking with Howard Waltz, he really said, one of the issues with China is that they have, companies ingrained all over the world. So they're really, their industry, is worldwide. They have companies in Africa, Algeria, UK, Europe. So their industry is really ingrained worldwide. So they really have kind of an entrenched hold on the steel industry.
Yeah, so as we look at that, did he give you any more examples as to what exactly some of the impacts that he's seeing in his company, which you noted is located here in Mount Airy, North Carolina?
Right. So he said most of the company's capital equipment does come from abroad, and that way, and because of that, they have the potential to be subject to tariffs. So he talked about kind of the nightmare that he's experienced over the last, couple of months or so, as they've been trying to understand the impact of the tariffs, what tariffs apply to them, which ones don't. He said that, InSteel has made commitments, but, one thing that industry leaders have noted earlier this week during the panel discussion was, companies aren't making investments right now because there's so much uncertainty in the market. And so because of all this tariff turmoil, if you will, they're not making investments that they don't have to be making right now. So they might be keeping their current commitments, but they're not going to do anything new. So things like machinery and parts have been ordered, but the cost of goods is suddenly unknown to them. And we've talked about this, this week, Nick, in a variety of different industries: agriculture, electronics, tech, textiles, like all of these, manufacturers and producers, they don't really know what they're paying for these products that they're ordering. And so, we've talked about that. He explained that 25% of the steel tariff was reimposed on Mexico and Canada, and that's what caused them to turn to Algeria as a source of suppliers. So the uncertainty that was created was not helping. And he explained how he had 3 different suppliers that shut down due to the adverse impact of the economic situation on their operations. And so they turned to Canada as a supplier, but when the 25% steel tariffs were reimposed, that's when they turned to Algeria. And he said, I don't understand whose interest is being served when my company is going to Algeria rather than Canada. He says it's nonsense.
Well, obviously, the steel industry has been, as I mentioned at the top, Katie, a big discussion in the first Trump administration. We're seeing it again now. You've got some additional quotes this morning, plus some other details on the steel industry. Where can folks go and find those?
Right. They can read the full article at carolinajournal.com.
Katie Zender joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at the roadways on your early Tuesday morning commute with Mike Doan.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
It's 5:51. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are keeping an eye this morning on a very interesting legal battle that has been unfolding over the last couple of months as it relates to appointment authority and authority over the North Carolina State Board of Elections. The North Carolina Supreme Court, in a 5-2 party line decision on Friday afternoon, has officially ruled that State Auditor Dave Boliek may retain his newly granted authority to appoint members to the State Board of Elections. The court rejected Democrat Governor Josh Stein's emergency request to block a lower court decision that allowed the shift in power under Senate Bill 382. That was a 2024 law that did pass the Republican-led General Assembly. It was vetoed by Governor Roy Cooper, went back for a veto override, and did officially become law. This ruling temporarily upholds a significant change in the state's electoral oversight structure. Previously, the governor appointed members to the State Board of Elections, but that piece of legislation transferred the power to the auditor. As a result, the board has officially shifted from a 3-2 Democrat majority to a 3-2 Republican majority and replaced its executive director. The court's majority, made up of 5 Republican justices, said that Governor Stein failed to prove that the Court of Appeals erred in its issuing of a writ of supersedes in April that blocked a trial court's decision invalidating key parts of Senate Bill 382. The majority criticized the trial court for misapplying legal precedent and emphasized that the executive power in North Carolina is in fact divided among 10 independently elected officials, not solely vested in the governor's mansion. Concurring opinions from Justices Phil Berger Jr. and Richard Dietz further defended the division of power within the executive branch. Berger argued that the Constitution permits reallocation of responsibilities among various Council of State members, with Justice Dietz acknowledging that legal complexities of this case and criticized the trial court for adopting what he called the governor's extreme position. As we just mentioned, the 2 Democrat justices, it was a 5-2 decision. Anita Earl and Allison Riggs issued strong dissents. Earls accused the majority of undermining the democratic accountability and overstepping by allowing a politically motivated power shift, while Riggs criticized the court's delay in issuing a ruling that warned that the majority was destabilizing 125 years of precedent regarding control of the election board. While the Supreme Court decision does allow Boliek's appointments to remain in place for now, that legal battle is something that is still going to continue. It is an ongoing legal challenge. The North Carolina Court of Appeals will continue to review the underlying constitutional dispute over Senate Bill 382's validity. Governor Stein and his legal team will continue to argue that the law violates the separation of powers by stripping the governor of core executive responsibilities, while we expect that Republican lawmakers will maintain that, in fact, the General Assembly has a constitutional authority to reassign duties among members of its Council of State. So that is the latest that we are tracking this morning, as we talked earlier with Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation walking us through these details. The appeals court still will likely go through, not likely, they will in fact go through a lengthy legal process that will likely include oral arguments and other sorts of briefings and pitches made to the appeals court before they make their final ruling on the case. And it seems like regardless of what decision they come up with, either the governor and his legal team or Republican lawmakers and their legal team will likely take whatever that said decision is and appeal it to the state Supreme Court. Well, they will actually rule on the merits of the case. So that is something that we are going to be tracking and covering. Not expecting a very quick timeline on that. However, it is something that we'll track over the next couple of months. And with that, Sam Hayes is now officially the executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. He replaced Karen Brinson Bell, whose term expired going back to the middle parts of May. Before taking the position, Hayes was the general counsel for North Carolina House Speaker Destin Hall after serving in the same position for former House Speaker Tim Moore. In that role, he worked on developing election policy and defending election law in the court system. He is an attorney from Kernersville and has practiced law in Washington, D.C., before returning to North Carolina, where he served as general counsel for the Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of the State Treasurer. In a recent press release, he said, quote, "I'd like to thank the state board for this appointment. It's an honor. Managing North Carolina's elections is no easy task, but I have confidence in the capabilities of this office. By building on the foundation of counting votes and following the law, we can be of a great service to the people of North Carolina." Many of the other board members, including the brand new chair and Francis DeLuca, noted the importance of this, saying Sam Hayes brings a wealth of election and government experience to this role. He knows North Carolina has a firm grip on election administration in our state, and I look forward to working alongside him. All of this very relevant ahead of the municipal elections, which will be coming to very many municipalities a little bit later on this year. Well, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.